Debbie and Dudley Davis was born in Lynchburg, Virginia on July 15th of 1952. She had a brief marriage after school that ended in divorce. Debbie then followed her cousin, Judy Fisk, to Richmond, Virginia and moved into an apartment on Devonshire Street in the Westover Hills neighborhood. Debbie started working as Style Weekly's accounts manager in 1985. They are a media outlet based in Richmond. Debbie was a pop culture fan who enjoyed Bruce Springsteen records. She was an extra in the HBO movie Finnegan Begin Again. Debbie was an avid mystery novel reader. She worked a couple nights a week at the Walden Bookstore at Cloverleaf Mall in Chesterfield County. On the evening of September 18th of 1987, Debbie and her coworker Deanna Hove took a road trip to Virginia Beach. They went to see a performance by Dana Carvey. After the show, Deanna dropped Debbie at her apartment and waited to drive off until she was safely inside. Little did Deanna know this would be the last time she ever saw Debbie again. The next morning, a man named Arnold Ellis saw a Renault Alliance parked in front of his house. He noticed the motor was running. The keys were in the ignition, and there was no sign of the car's driver. Arnold Ellis then called the police. Police officers determined that the car belonged to Debbie Davis. She lived one street over from Arnold Ellis. A police officer knocked on Debbie's door but got no response. An elderly neighbor then came to give the officer a key. Inside, the officer saw Debbie's body face down on her bed. She was topless, wearing only a pair of cut-off jean shorts. Her right arm was tied behind her back with thick bootlaces. Debbie's left arm was tied beneath her. The perpetrator tightly twisted a black sock around her neck. She had been strangled and assaulted. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator stole a rocking chair from a nearby porch and propped it up outside Debbie's kitchen window to gain entrance. Next to Debbie's bed on her nightstand was a mystery novel she had been reading called Presumed Innocent. It was about a woman who was tied up and then her life was taken. Investigators knew the perpetrator was smart and most likely experienced. He left no fingerprints. There were no witnesses and nothing had been taken as far as investigators could tell. Detective Ray Williams said, "Very seldom does a crook do that kind of damage and spend that much time with his victim and not leave a bunch of clues." But he left nothing. Lorna Wyckoff, the founder of Style Weekly, posted a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Investigators looked at people in Debbie's life to see if anyone stood out, but found nothing. Debbie led a quiet life. Debbie was not dating anyone. She had not seen her ex-husband in years, and she did not use drugs and did not hang out in bars. Just 2 weeks after Debbie's life was ended, tragedy would strike again in Richmond, Virginia. Susan Elizabeth Helms was born on February 6th of 1955 in Charleston, South Carolina. She moved to Richmond, Virginia to work on her residency in neurosurgery at the Medical College of Virginia. Susan married Marcel Slagg and bought a house in the tranquil Woodland Heights neighborhood in Richmond. On October 3rd of 1987, Marcel pulled up to their house at 1:45 a.m. As he entered the house, he could hear her moving around upstairs. Marcel knew she had worked late and thought he might have woken her up. He quickly took a shower and silently crept into their dark bedroom. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could make out a sight from a horror movie. His wife's partially nude body laying half out of their bedroom closet. A red leather belt was around her neck. Susan's hands had been bound tightly behind her back with an extension cord and necktie. Just like Debbie, Susan had been assaulted and strangled. Marcel saw their bedroom window was wide open. Their house was a little less than a mile away from Debbie Davis's house. Detective Ray Williams was on duty that night and was ordered to work both cases. Williams said that the perpetrator was still in the house when Marcel arrived home. He heard somebody upstairs. Couldn't have been Susan. She was already gone. On the balcony outside the window, investigators found an open Vaseline jar left by the perpetrator. They traced its purchase to a store adjacent to nearby Cloverleaf Mall. The lead was followed but led to nowhere. Realizing a serial offender is in their midst, the community erupted into fear. They demanded action from the police. Williams worked tirelessly for days and finally, he did find a clue that could potentially be useful. When he looked through the financial records at the Cloverleaf Mall Walden bookstore where Debbie worked part-time, He found a check written by Susan and endorsed on the back by Debbie. Williams wasn't sure if this was just a coincidence or if it was a possible link between the two crimes. As Detective Williams pondered this question, yet another horrendous crime took place in the Richmond area. Diane Cho was born in Korea in 1972. She and her family immigrated to the United States in 1984. On 1987, 15-year-old Diane was a freshman at Manchester High School. She was very smart and took care of virtually everything for her parents who barely spoke English. In October of 1987, Diane told one of her friends about a disturbing, recurring nightmare she had been having. Diane kept having dreams about an unknown man following her. She also told her friends at school that she sometimes saw this unknown man from her dreams at the mall. One night in November of 1987, Diane went to the Cloverleaf Mall Theater with a friend. They bought tickets for The Princess Bride. She then began trembling with fright and pointed out her stalker, who was staring at them from the parking lot. It had been barely 5 months since Diane's family moved to Richmond, where her parents worked long hours running a convenience store near Virginia Commonwealth University. It's not known if Diane ever told her parents about the encounter with the unknown man at the Cloverleaf Mall. On the night of November 21st of 1987, Diane's parents arrived home to their apartment around 9. Diane's mother then gave her a haircut. As they went to bed around midnight, they could hear Diane typing out an English paper in her bedroom across the hall. The next day, Diane's parents called home around 2 p.m. to remind their children to get ready for an afternoon church service. Diane's 12-year-old brother, Roman, answered the phone. Diane was still asleep, and he did not want to anger her by waking her up. Diane's parents arrived home about an hour later, and her mother went straight to Diane's bedroom and opened the door. Diane's mom then screamed loudly. Diane was tied up with rope. She had been strangled and assaulted, and her bedroom window was open. You can clearly see the pattern of all the crimes. It would happen again for the 4th time. 44-year-old Sue Tucker lived in Arlington County, Virginia in November of 1987. She was an editor for a Department of Agriculture magazine. Her husband, Reg Tucker, was a former photographer for the Fairfax County Public Schools. Reg had taken a job as a photography teacher in his native country of Wales in early 1987. Sue was preparing the couple's home for sale and winding down her projects at work as she planned to join her husband in Wales. Ironically, they wanted to immigrate because of an increase in violence in the United States. They were worried about crime. A neighbor of the couple, Audrey Sislove, had been unable to reach Sue for a few days and noticed that Sue's bedroom window had been open for days. When Audrey tried to enter their home to check on her friend, she smelled an odor like rotting flesh. She called the police, who arrived and found Sue's badly decomposing body laid out across her bed. She had been tightly bound in nylon ropes, strangled and assaulted. There were no fingerprints. The perpetrator had broken in through a small basement laundry room window. Before leaving, he had taken the time to fix a snack. He discarded a partially eaten orange on the Tuckers' dining room table. While investigators were inside the house, the telephone rang. It was Reg Tucker. The last few days he had been trying to reach Sue. Police officers had to give him the horrible news. Arlington investigators who were assigned to the case realized the crime was very similar to the one that took place in January of 1984. It was then that 32-year-old attorney Carolyn Ham was slain. Her body had been found not far from Sue Tucker's home. David Vasquez, a fast food worker with a low IQ, had confessed to that crime and was serving a 35-year prison sentence for it. If he was in prison, why were there identical crimes being committed almost 4 years later? Arlington County Detective Joe Horgies was the lead investigator on Sue Tucker's case. He traveled to the prison to interview David Vasquez because the modus operandi was the same. The hands tied behind the back, rope around the neck, and they were both assaulted. After the interview, it was clear to the detective that Vasquez was not at all involved with what happened to Sue. As investigators in both Arlington County and Richmond investigated their cases, they noticed something. Just like Richmond had a serial offender attacking women in their homes in 1987, Arlington County had their own maniac in 1983 and 1984. It all started in Arlington in June of 1983 with the abduction and assault of a woman in the county's Green Valley area by a knife-wielding black man in his late teens or early 20s wearing a homemade mask. Over the next 7 months, as his attacks escalated, he abducted women in their cars and entered their houses and apartments through unlocked windows. He relentlessly assaulted and brutalized 9 women. He tied some of them up with nylon cords cut from their Venetian blinds. Former Arlington County Commonwealth's attorney, Halen Fay, was quoted as saying he was a one-person crime wave. In January of 1984, an Arlington woman came home to discover evidence from an unsettling break-in. The cords of her Venetian blinds had been cut and were laid out on her bed. The intruder left the house. It seemed like he was there waiting for her to come home and got tired of waiting. It was 4 days after that Carolyn Hamm was found bound and strangled in her garage. Arlington police arrested David Vasquez and charged him with taking her life. Vasquez did not match the description that any of the assault victims gave, but the crimes in the area did stop. It was only after Sue Tucker's slaying that investigators learned the perpetrator of all the assaults was definitely not Vasquez, and the unknown man took a brief hiatus and then continued his attacks in Richmond. Detective Horgies received a teletype from Richmond police where they described the identical strangulations of Debbie Davis, Susan Helms, and Diane Cho. After sharing all the information, investigators concluded it was the same man responsible for all the crimes, perhaps even Carolyn Hamm's slaying. The investigation stalled for another few agonizing weeks while they hoped for a break in the case before the strangler could take another life. Investigators looked at the timeline of the crimes. Many of them took place in 1983 to 1984, and then continued in 1987. The FBI felt that the perpetrator would not have stopped his attacks of his own volition. It was likely that he had been jailed for another offense between the slayings of Carolyn Hamm and Debbie Davis. As detectives tried to think about possible suspects, one of them thought of Tommy Spencer. He was a teenager that was arrested for burglary during the mid-1970s. Investigators discovered that Spencer had been arrested in January of 1984 for break-ins in neighboring Alexandria. He had been paroled to a halfway house in Richmond in 1987 right before Debbie's life was taken. Investigators went to the halfway house. They found that Spencer signed himself out on every evening a crime took place. He got a furlough to go to Arlington on the day that Sue Tucker's life was taken. Investigators decided to put Spencer under surveillance. They wanted to catch him in the act of doing something incriminating. Over 2 weeks, plainclothes Richmond police officers observed Spencer committing parole violations, like spending the night at his girlfriend's house. They were intrigued to find that he would hang out for hours at Cloverleaf Mall. As you remember, the mall had strong ties to Debbie Davis, Susan Helms, and Diane Cho. On January 20th of 1988, Arlington and Richmond detectives took Spencer into custody and took a sample of his blood. Without witnesses or fingerprints or any other direct evidence tying Spencer to the crimes, law enforcement had to rely on a brand new forensic science method called DNA fingerprinting. At that stage, it has only been used in one cold case in the United Kingdom and never before in the United States. It was the case of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. It would take more than 6 weeks, but a private lab in New York would report back that Spencer's DNA had been matched to male DNA at the crime scenes of Debbie Davis, Dr. Susan Helms, Susan Tucker, and assault victims in Arlington and Richmond. Timothy Spencer was the man who had become known as the Southside Strangler. He went to trial in July of 1988. After a 6-day trial, he was found guilty. It was the first conviction based on DNA evidence in the United States. Spencer was given multiple life sentences. What about Carolyn Hamm and David Vasquez, you ask? Why was he found guilty of the crime if he didn't match the description that was given by victims of any other crime in the area? David Vasquez first became a suspect in that case because Carolyn complained that he was peeping on her while she was sunbathing in the week leading up to her demise. With his low IQ, it was easy for investigators to get a false confession out of him. They revealed all of the details to him and he parroted it back to them. After DNA linked Timothy Spencer to all the other crimes, investigators were seriously doubting that Vasquez was involved. DNA soon proved it as well, and David was released. David became known as the first person in the United States that was exonerated thanks to DNA. Shortly before 11 p.m. on Wednesday, April 27th of 1994, Timothy Wilson Spencer was strapped into Virginia's sturdy Okan electric chair dubbed Old Sparky at Greensville Correctional Center and was executed, finally bringing a stop to the horrendous crime spree. Catherine Louise Martin was born on October 25, 1959. Her family and friends referred to her as Kathy. Kathy met Mike Odom in high school when they were 16 years old. They dated for a while and then decided to marry. Before they could get married, Mike was arrested for selling heroin. He sold it to an undercover officer. He was sentenced to 6 years for this crime, but only served 2. Kathy told her family that she was set on marrying him when he got released. 2 years later, when he was freed, they did end up marrying. Kathy and Mike had 2 children together, Tasha and Sean. They lived in Harris County, Texas. Kathy's father, Frankie Martin, decided to give Mike a job at his sign business. Kathy did everything to ensure the marriage worked. She was also described as a loving mother who would have done anything for her kids. On the night of March 3, 1987, Mike tried to contact Kathy. He was out of town working. Kathy was supposed to be home with the children, so it was alarming to him when she did not answer the phone. Mike called their next-door neighbor and asked him to check up on Kathy and their children. The neighbor knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He looked in through the windows and saw that the television was still on. Instead of calling police, the neighbor drove into town, found a policeman, and they both drove back to the Odom's house. The officer found the front door to be unlocked. He entered the house, and inside of the living room sofa was 4-year-old Tasha. She had been beaten badly and unconscious, but was fortunately still alive. 2-month-old Sean was found unharmed in his bedroom. In Kathy and Mike's bedroom, the officer found Kathy's battered, naked body. She was covered in blood. Kathy had been severely beaten and stabbed more than 16 times. She had also been strangled, assaulted, and her wrists were bound with a cord to a lamp. Officers feared that the person responsible for this would come back and finish the job they started with Tasha. Both Tasha and Sean were taken to the hospital. It was ordered that they could not be left alone. Kathy's father, Frankie, arrived at the crime scene. He was told to go to the hospital to be with his grandchildren. While at the hospital, Frankie learned about what happened to his daughter on a TV screen. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mike finally arrived. Policemen paid special attention to his appearance. One of the officers noted that Mike had several red stains on his shirt. It looked like blood. A search of the Odom's house revealed blood in the bathroom. The perpetrator, possibly Mike, had attempted to clean up before leaving. Police found no sign of a break-in. All doors were locked except for the front door. This indicated that Kathy knew the person that took her life. The fact that she was stabbed so many times also told investigators it was a personal crime. Kathy's clothes told police something about what happened. They were found neatly folded on the floor. Investigators theorized that the perpetrator attacked Tasha in order to get whatever he wanted from Kathy. Back at the hospital, Tasha was in critical condition. She was in a coma and was reliant on IVs. While doctors worked on saving her life, investigators focused on her father, Mike Odom. He appeared emotional and distraught, but investigators had their doubts about him from the start. Investigators discovered that Mike did not come straight home from work like he said he would. He had gone out with friends of his. To investigators, it was something they had seen before. An individual arranging a slaying, being at a different location, then calling someone else to go check in on the victim. Mike's clothing was taken to the forensic lab for testing. That was not all. Investigators also found strange stains on the car floor of the neighbor, Tim Robinson. It was clear to investigators. Tim and Mike conducted a plan to take Kathy's life. Perhaps Mike was using again and was seeking insurance money. There was soon a twist in the case. The medical examiner estimated that Kathy's life was taken around 6 hours before her body was found. That would be about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Both Mike and Tim claimed to be at work at the time. While investigators checked their alibis, a witness came forward. That witness is 4-year-old Tasha O'Donnell. She emerged from her coma and told investigators that she remembers a man entering the house. Tasha said the man had yellow hair. Neither Mike Odom nor Tim Robinson had blonde hair. Unfortunately, the man's hair color was all Tasha could remember. When the forensic tests came back, it showed that the stains in Tim's car were motor oil. The stains on Mike's shirt was paint. Furthermore, co-workers provided solid alibis for both Mike and Tim. Each of them also passed polygraph tests. The two of them were then ruled out and investigators could move on to the next person. That next person was not very hard to find. Kathy had a sister, Shelley Martin. She was married to Greg Marquardt. They met thanks to Mike. Greg and Mike had been close since they were both in the drug scene. Like Kathy, Shelley was also 16 when she met the man she would marry. Greg was 25 years old at the time, which should have been a red flag already. Greg and Shelley married in 1983. Soon after, both Shelley and Kathy got addicted, just like Greg and Mike. Greg and Shelley were known to steal from her parents for money. Greg had been raised by a wealthy aunt and uncle, and the aunt repaid the Martins the money and everyone agreed not to file charges. While Mike and Kathy had turned their lives around, Greg and Shelley did not. They were in and out of jail frequently. Shortly before Kathy's life was taken, she told a friend that Greg and Shelley had been over recently, and that while Shelley was in the other room with the baby, Greg had made advances towards her, which she, of course, rejected. When questioned, Greg would claim that on the night of the crime, at the times in which he was not with his wife, he was with a man named Hampton Robinson III. In an unimportant but interesting note, Robinson was a friend of Charles Harrelson. Harrelson was the father of actor Woody Harrelson, and in 1982 was convicted of slaying a judge. In fact, Robinson had testified against Harrelson at his trial. There was ample evidence that Greg had been in the house. They found his fingerprints and his hair throughout the crime scene. There was only one problem. As a family member who had been in the house numerous times, this did not prove a thing. Kathy's parents told investigators that they believed Greg was responsible. Frankie said that 2 days after Kathy's slaying, he received a phone call in the middle of the night from the hospital where Tasha was being treated, telling him that Shelley and Greg had come to visit. Frankie told them to not allow admittance, first because he was suspicious of Greg, but also the fact that no one had a reason to be there at 3 in the morning, especially them. Tasha's grandmother, Charlene Martin, who was at the hospital, recalled what happened. When Tasha saw Greg, she became very scared, and he was ordered to leave. Investigators asked Tasha if it was her Uncle Greg that she saw inside their house with Kathy on the day of the attack. Unfortunately, she could not remember. Investigators tried many techniques, but due to her head injury, she could not remember a thing. While Greg denied any involvement when talking to investigators, he was surprisingly open about his attraction to Kathy, particularly to one part of her body. Greg had a thing for Kathy's stomach. This fixation was so obvious that Kathy had even mentioned it to her friends. Interestingly enough, Kathy was mainly stabbed in the stomach. At one point during the interview, Greg asked to leave to put more money in a parking lot meter. He never came back. He also refused a polygraph. Investigators decided to look into his alibi. Shelley said that Greg drove her to school at 10:30 a.m. on the day of the crime and picked her up again at 2:30 p.m. This 4-hour window was more than enough time for Greg to commit the crime. And as you'll remember, the medical examiner determined that her life was taken around 1 p.m. that day. Even though Kathy was assaulted, this crime occurred years before DNA was widely used in cold case investigations. At the time, they were using serology. Basically, they were doing blood group typing. It was very difficult to do, and you need a very large sample. You'd still just get a blood type, which was not very conclusive. The blood type from the evidence collected from Kathy's body was consistent with Greg Marquardt's blood type. He was type O as well as the perpetrator. About 50% of the population has the same blood type, so it did not tell investigators much. Without more evidence, the case sadly went cold for some time. For Frankie, it was especially difficult, believing that the man who took his daughter's life was married to his other daughter. In 1998, a cold case team was formed, and one of the first cases they looked at was that of Kathy Odoms. By then, DNA testing was dependable enough to generate a DNA profile from the biological evidence in Kathy's case. Tests showed that Greg Marquardt was part of the 2% of the general population who could have been the perpetrator. Still not conclusive, but a lot better than 50%. Greg quickly came up with an explanation to investigators. He claimed that he and Kathy were having a consensual affair. Greg said that he was with her on the morning her life was taken. He insisted that she was alive when he left. Greg was not arrested at the time because even though investigators did not believe him, they were concerned that they did not have enough for a conviction. They had to prove that he was present when the crime was committed. Investigators reached out to Catherine Long, who worked for Awkward Cellmark, a private forensic lab in Dallas, Texas. Catherine came up with an unusual strategy to try and solve Kathy's crime. She and her colleagues were strangling each other. Let me explain. They wanted to determine if a perpetrator would deposit skin cells in the act of choking a victim. They realized that there was indeed a significant transfer of skin cells from the perpetrator to the victim. Investigators needed to find something in Kathy's evidence file that would have contained the perpetrator's skin cells. They decided to do tests on the electrical cord that was used to bind Kathy's hands. In an incredible piece of luck, the cord had been stored in a paper bag and not a plastic bag. Paper bag provides breathability so that there is not any moisture on the item inside and it's going to stay dry. That will therefore prolong the DNA life. It will actually preserve the DNA longer than if it were in a plastic bag. The cord was covered in blood. Investigators swapped the cord to obtain all the evidence they could. Testing revealed two genetic profiles, that of Kathy Odom and that of Greg Marquardt's. The only way Marquardt's DNA could be on the cord was if, in fact, he was the perpetrator. Finally, on December 18, 2002, Greg Marquardt was arrested and charged with taking Kathy's life. While in prison, Marquardt confessed to a fellow inmate. He said that he was high on heroin when he drove to Kathy's house that day. Once inside, he made advances that she rejected. To force her to comply, he struck Tasha repeatedly in the head. He then threatened to take Sean's life as well. In order to save her children's lives, she had to comply. With a knife from the kitchen, Marquardt then cut the electrical cord from the lamp and tied Kathy's hands. After he assaulted her, he took her life. Marquardt then cleaned up in the bathroom and changed into Mike Odom's clothing. Little did he know that advances in DNA technology would be used to identify him as the perpetrator 15 years later. 6 months after his arrest, Greg's wealthy aunt passed away, leaving him hundreds of thousands of dollars and part ownership of her home. The Martins decided to file a suit against him, and it tied up the estate, which prevented him from using those funds towards his defense. In 2004, Greg Marquardt pled guilty and he was convicted of all the charges against him. In July of the same year, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. He passed away of liver disease after serving 4 years of his sentence in 2008. He was 56 years old. Sergeant Roger Wedsworth was quoted as saying, "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy." Shelley and her parents lost contact after the crime. She took Mark Wood's side while they believed he was responsible. It was said that for a long time, Shelley continued to support Mark Wood and believed in his innocence. A few years after the crime, the Martins moved to Oklahoma. A few years after that, seemed that Shelley made up with her parents and she too moved to Oklahoma to be near her parents. Kathy's father, Frankie, said, Raina Lynn Reeson was born on May 6, 1976 in La Porte, Indiana. She lived with her parents, Ben and Karen Reeson. She had an older sister, Lori, and a younger sister, Wendy. In 1993, 16-year-old Raina was described as a good student and aspired to a career as a veterinarian because of her deep compassion for animals. Other than being a sophomore at La Porte High School, Raina worked 3 jobs as well. She worked at the animal hospital where she walked dogs and cleaned kettles. On Friday, March 26, 1993, Raina was tasked with closing the animal hospital after a short shift from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Raina and her ex-boyfriend, Matt Elser, were planning to spend the evening together, and she could not wait to see him again. They had recently broken up, and the date was a step towards possibly getting back together. Like Raina, Matt came from a good, upstanding family and was regarded as a decent young man. In short, he was the kind of guy any parent would be happy to have their daughter date. Matt arrived at the animal hospital at 6 p.m. to pick up Raina. He got out of his car after waiting a while and headed to the front door, where he found that all of the lights were off and the door was closed. Matt saw that Raina's car was not in the parking lot, so he drove to her home to see if she was there. Raina's father, Ben, told Matt that she had not returned home from work. They hadn't seen her since she left home to go to the animal hospital for her shift. Her family assumed she was out on the date with Matt, but now they were worried. It was very unlike Raina to not tell her family where exactly she was. Raina's parents, her younger sister Wendy, and Matt all waited in the house for Raina to come home. When Raina had still not shown up by 10:30 p.m., her family went to the police station to report her as missing. The police could only register a missing persons report after waiting for 24 hours. Ben gave them a photo of Raina and asked them to be on the lookout either way since it was so unlike Raina. Her family then started to look for her. They tried to get in touch with her acquaintances, but no one knew where she could be. They also handed out missing persons flyers in the area, hoping someone would come forward with valuable information. When the police got involved, they made a public appeal for any information that led to Raina's whereabouts. Immediately, a handful of eyewitnesses came forward, saying that just before 6 p.m., they saw a sedan parked outside the animal hospital where Raina worked. Multiple eyewitnesses said they saw two men in the sedan along with Raina. It appeared that Raina was arguing with the men. The witnesses ignored it at first since they assumed it was just a couple having an argument. Matt Elser was questioned by investigators. He stuck to his story about waiting for Raina and discovering that she was not at the animal hospital. The police learned that Matt had wanted to take a break from the relationship. They had taken a break, but recently gotten back together. Their date that night was supposed to be really special, and they were both looking forward to it. Matt knew something serious had to have happened for Raina to not show up. Raina's parents assured the authorities that Matt was a good and trustworthy young man. They also pointed out that his car was not the one witnesses saw, clearing him of any wrongdoing. Raina's car was discovered the night after she disappeared, not far from the animal hospital. The car's hood was raised and gave the impression that she may have had car trouble. Officers were able to get her car started easily with her keys that were still in the ignition when they arrived. It appeared as if the car breakdown was staged. Furthermore, officers saw that Raina's handbag was still in her car, which contained her purse and credit cards. All of her money was also still in the car, which meant this was definitely not a robbery. A man's ring was found in Raina's glove compartment. It was shown to Matt Elser. Matt said that it was not his ring. He identified the man's ring as belonging to Jason Tibbs. Jason was Raina's ex-boyfriend. They dated back in the 7th grade and broke up after being together for around 8 months. He had a criminal history and had dropped out of school. Police decided to question 16-year-old Jason Tibbs. He admitted that the ring in question was really his and inquired as to where it had been found. When officers informed him it had been discovered in Raina's car, he claimed that they were still friends and he had done some work on the car and must have forgotten his ring in the glove compartment. Jason said that he had taken off his ring to protect it from grime and grease while working on the car. Locals vouched for Jason and said that he was an excellent mechanic. It seemed plausible that Raina had contacted him if she was having car trouble. Investigators asked him where he was on the night that she disappeared. Jason claimed that he had been playing a game of fox hunting. Fox hunting is a game of hide and seek, but played in cars. Friends share their locations over wireless radios and try to hunt each other down. His friends confirmed they'd been playing fox hunting that evening, but no one had actually seen Jason. Raina's father confirmed that Raina and Jason were friends, so the ring seemed to be a dead end. Raina's case started to go cold until the police made a discovery. Matt's Letterman jacket was found by a Lawport sheriff's deputy. Raina had last been seen with the jacket. Matt gave it to Raina to wear. It signified that the two of them were together. The jacket was found about 6 or 7 miles away from where her car was found. The jacket had been placed there after the police's initial search. Unfortunately, the jacket yielded no further clues or evidence. On April 26, 1993, a month after Reyna was last seen, a fisherman and his teenage daughter were at a pond off Range Road, north of LaPorte, Indiana. The daughter was taking a stroll when she saw a pair of human legs in the water. She yelled for her father to come take a look. He went closer and determined that it was a female body in the water. 2 logs were placed on top of her body. When police arrived at the scene, they noted that the unknown woman wore the same clothes that Reyna was last seen wearing before she disappeared. Despite the body's advanced state of decomposition, it was determined that she was Reyna Rison. This was no longer a missing persons case. No obvious wounds or signs of significant trauma were found on her body. Later, during the autopsy, it was concluded that Reyna had been strangled. With the discovery, investigators went back to Jason Tibbs to see if he knew anything. He told them about Ray McCarty. Ray was married to Reyna's older sister, Lori Rison. Ray had assaulted and impregnated Reyna when she was 11 and had been imprisoned for the crime. His probation ended only 2 months before Reyna went missing. You'd think Lori Rison would have divorced Ray for what he did. But no, they were still married. He clearly had a motive and was dangerous with a past criminal record targeted against Reyna. Investigators visited Ray and Lori's house. The couple told investigators that neither of them saw Reyna on the day she disappeared. Ray stated that he was busy shooting pigeons on a friend's farm that the detectives called a friend, and he confirmed that Ray was indeed with him that night. Something didn't feel right to investigators, so they went to talk with Ray again. Ray talked to them alone and told them that he had seen Reyna on the night she vanished. He told them that he was house hunting on March 26, 1993. At about 5:40 p.m., he was gazing out the window of a house when he saw the animal hospital. He claimed he had just briefly seen Reyna at the parking lot of the animal hospital and asked if she knew where Lori was. He then left and picked up a female hitchhiker that night. Ray claimed the hitchhiker was the reason why he initially did not want to admit to having seen her. She did not fully trust him after what he did to her sister. Ray McCarty became the main suspect at this point, but there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, and the case went cold. Unfortunately, the case remained cold for almost 18 months. It was then that Indiana State Police pulled over a van driven by Larry Hall. Hall would travel across the Midwest for Civil War and the Independence War reenactments. His van resembled one used in an attempted kidnapping. The police examined the van and discovered several items related to Reyna's case. In his van, he had newspaper clippings of Reyna and a prescription bottle with the name R. Rison on it. Larry claimed he was the one that abducted and slayed Reyna. He was then arrested. Detectives investigated his movements on the night of her disappearance and discovered that he was in Kentucky and the prescription bottle was a fake. Hall had falsely confessed to abducting and slaying around 50 other women. He seemed like the type of person who would insert himself into any investigation and confess. Larry Hall was subsequently ruled out as a suspect in Reyna's case. He was not completely innocent, though. He was found guilty of taking 15-year-old Jessica Roach's life. I'll go over the case briefly at the end of the video for those interested. As for Reyna's case, it remained cold until 1998. Investigators did not know what else they could do and looked at their initial suspects again: Matt Elser, Jason Tibbs, and Ray McCarty. Matt's alibi was solid and investigators never really considered him a serious suspect. Jason's story of fox hunting wasn't that solid because no one actually saw him, but it seemed he was on good terms with Reyna. Ray, on the other hand, lied about his alibi at first. And he was most definitely a horrible person, so investigators decided to focus on him. They got a warrant to search Ray's property. Inside his house, investigators found 2 handguns and a stun gun. They also discovered blood in his car's trunk, but were unable to determine its source. Ray McCarty was arrested in May 1998. He waited in jail for 15 months while the police continued to build their case against him. While Ray was in jail, a new prosecutor had been assigned. He was a hunter, and it was concluded that the blood belonged to a deer. The prosecutor felt that there was not enough evidence linking him to the crime, and they were forced to let him go again. He was released after a year in jail. For the next 9 years, the case would once again be classified as a cold case, unfortunately. Then in 2008, police got a lead that would blow this case wide open. They received a letter from an inmate serving a 44-year sentence. His name is Ricky Hammonds. He requested to talk with investigators. Ricky was in prison because he took his roommate's life. Ricky said he decided to come forward after thinking about his niece. He said he would want someone to come forward if anything had happened to her. This is everything he had to say. Back in 1993, when he was 14 years old, he was in the roof of a barn next to his parents' house smoking marijuana. He heard a car drive in the barn. Ricky saw his sister's boyfriend, Eric Feldman, and Jason Tibbs. They opened the trunk of his sister's sedan, and Ricky then saw a body covered by a blanket. Ricky could still make out the upper half of the victim. It was a female wearing a Leatherman jacket. He did not know it was Raina, but a couple of days later when Raina's face appeared in the media, he realized who it was. Ricky said that he was scared to come forward back in 1993 because he was worried he would get into trouble for smoking marijuana. The police tracked Eric Feldman down in South Carolina. He was visibly nervous. He did not want to speak to them and refused all interviews. Investigators then told him he will face no consequences if he can tell them exactly what happened with Raina. He accepted the deal and told them everything. Eric said that he and Jason were cruising in his girlfriend's sedan when they drove past the animal hospital on March 26, 1993. Jason wanted to get Raina to leave Matt and take him back. When she exited the animal hospital, he called her over to the car. She clearly did not want to talk to him. Before she could scream, he pushed her into the car and told Eric to drive away quickly. A couple minutes later, Eric stopped the car and Raina tried to run away. Jason followed her and said, "If I can't have you, no one can." He then strangled her until she stopped breathing. Jason and Eric loaded Raina's body in the trunk and drove to the barn. That is where Ricky saw them. After much deliberation, Eric and Jason then decided to place Raina's body in the pond and weigh her down with logs. Eric drove Jason back to the clinic to pick up Raina's car. Jason abandoned the car. He also discarded Matt's jacket. In August 2013, 38-year-old Jason Tibbs was arrested and charged with taking Raina Reeson's life. 20 years had passed since Raina's life was ended. His trial started in late 2013. His defense argued that Ricky was not a trustworthy witness since he was a high school student at the time and because he waited 15 years to come forward with the truth. In order to ensure that Eric Freeman testified truthfully in the trial, he was granted immunity from prosecution. After a lengthy trial that lasted until December 2014, Jason Tibbs was found guilty. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison with 20 years served. Outside the courtroom, Raina's family cried. They hugged each other and the prosecutor. The Reeson family got some form of justice, but the daughter they'd lost in a crime of passion would never come back. Tibbs still claims that he is innocent and that Ray McCarty is responsible for what happened to Raina. Tibbs made numerous appeals to the Indiana Supreme Court after being shot down by the state's appellate court. On September 8, 2016, the Indiana Court of Appeals ruled against a request for a new trial by Jason Tibbs. As recently as 2018, his lawyers publicly stated that they are still fighting for his innocence. Raina was 16 years old and had her whole life ahead of her. She was finally happy again when she and Matt got back together. Unfortunately, it seems that she was surrounded by terrible people that let her down. As promised, I'll go over some of the details of Jessica Roach's case. 15-year-old Jessica lived in Georgetown, Illinois in 1993. She had dreams of one day being a pilot. On September 20th, 1993, Jessica Roach went outside to ride her new bicycle. Tragedy struck when Jessica's sister found the bike lying on the road, but Jessica was nowhere to be found. Her sister alerted their father, who contacted the police, but Jessica would never be seen alive again. 6 weeks after she went missing, her remains were discovered in Perrysville, Indiana, which is close to the state's border. Her body was found by a farmer who made the discovery while using his combine. Jessica's body showed signs of having been there for some time. Due to the state of her remains, it was difficult for investigators to learn more about when, how, or where she lost her life. Police found suspect Larry Hall about a year later when he began trailing a pair of girls. The girls reported him to the police and provided investigators with Hall's license plate number. When he was brought in for police questioning and shown a photo of Jessica, Hall apparently flinched and covered his face before denying that he'd ever seen her. A confession eventually did trickle out, with Hall telling police that he tied her up but couldn't remember what he used. He then said that he removed her clothing, assaulted her, and strangled her against a tree with his belt. Hall also provided vague descriptions of other young girls he'd abused. "I picked up several girls in other areas, but I can't remember which ones I hurt," he told police. Investigators determined that he was falsely confessing to a lot of crimes, but that he did indeed take Jessica's life. Hall was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole. He is currently incarcerated at a medium-security prison in North Carolina. Jessica Roach's loved ones held benefits in past years in her memory, and in 2015 they created a scholarship in her name. Narborough is an extremely safe village in Leicestershire, England. It is known for one crime and one crime only. It took place in 1983. 15-year-old Linda Mann lived in Narborough. She attended Loverworth Grammar School and Community College. She was the younger sister of Susan Mann, who was 2 years her senior. Their mother was Kathleen Mann, who moved to Northborough after her marriage ended. Kathleen married Edward Eastwood in 1980 when Susan was 14 and Linda was 12. Linda was described as a typical teenager. She was quiet but popular. She liked school and enjoyed being with friends. Linda had little trouble with adolescence. An adventurous girl, she liked everything about growing up: music, hairstyles, makeup, and clothes. If money for clothes was a bit short, Linda would babysit to earn money and make her own dresses. On November 21st of 1983, Linda walked to a friend's house but never made it there. She promised Kathleen and Edward that she would be home by 10 p.m. By midnight, Linda was still not home. Her frantic parents called the police. They searched all night for her. A hospital porter discovered her body at 7:20 a.m. as he was on his way to work. He initially thought it was a mannequin. Linda had been assaulted and strangled. Her jeans were removed and the rest of her clothes were strewn about. She had a scarf around her neck. The scarf was used to strangle her. When people in Narborough heard about the crime, they were absolutely horrified. Young girls were encouraged to walk in groups from then on. Investigators searched the immediate area around the crime scene, but were not able to find anything useful. Only a few hundred yards away from the crime scene, there was a local psychiatric hospital. Some people believed that the perpetrator could be a patient at the hospital, but no evidence of this was found. During the autopsy, male DNA was collected from Linda's body. The individual had type A blood. This meant about 10% of the adult male population in England could be responsible. Edward's blood was taken, and it was found he was not the same 10% blood group as the slayer of Linda. A group of investigators walked from house to house to see if they could gather any information. Other investigators made a list of all offenders of similar crimes in Leicestershire and went about questioning them all. Investigators received a call about a spiky-haired youth. The person on the phone claimed to have seen him at about 8 p.m., about 2 minutes away from where Linda's body was found. Unfortunately, he was never identified. For 3 long years, investigators tried to find the perpetrator. It was then, in 1986, that tragedy struck again. 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth lived in Enderby, Leicestershire, with her parents and her brother, Andrew. She was gifted at drawing. She had a part-time job working at the newsagent's shop in Enderby. On July 31st of 1986, Dawn left work at 4 p.m. and headed to her friend's house in Narborough. She was told to be home by 7 p.m. Dawn was last seen at 4:40 p.m. by passing motorists passing King Edward Avenue. By 7:30 p.m., with no sign of Dawn, her parents got concerned. They drove through Narborough and they couldn't find her. At 9:40 p.m., they called the police. They could not help but think of Linda Mann and hoping their daughter did not suffer a similar fate. A few days later, police officers searching for Dawn found her body in a field beside 10 Pound Lane. She had been assaulted and strangled. Male DNA collected from Dawn's body revealed the attacker had the same blood type as the man that slayed Lindemann. This was not the only similarity. Both crimes took place on footpaths. Both girls were teenagers and both walking alone. They were both found in similar circumstances, having suffered the same fate. Linda and Dawn both attended Lutterworth Grammar School and Community College. At the foot of 10 Pound Lane, the police parked a mobile incident room to take information from villagers and passers-by. The police took about 200 telephone calls and dozens of people visited the mobile unit. The most promising new lead concerned a motorcycle that had been parked under the motorway bridge. There were several reports of a young man in a red crash helmet observed in the vicinity sometime around 5 p.m. on the day of the crime. On August 1st, the day after Dawn was reported missing, but a day before her body was found, a policewoman and a detective saw a youth on a red motorcycle and a red crash helmet take an interest in the search. A police constable on security duty was approached by a 17-year-old kitchen porter from Carlton Hayes Hospital. It is the psychiatric hospital close to where both Linda and Dawn's bodies were found. The kitchen porter told the constable that he saw Dawn walking on the day she disappeared. The constable arranged that they talk to him later again to find out some more information. Before they could talk to him again, valuable information was given to the incident room. The information came from the kitchen porter's friend who also worked at the Carlton Hayes Hospital. This friend had been on holiday the day Dawn went missing, but he had gone to the hospital to collect his wages. The kitchen porter visited him at 10 p.m. and excitedly told him that Dawn's body had been found in a hedge near a gate by the M1 bridge. The friend's father overheard the conversation and asked the kitchen porter where he had gotten his information because nothing about Dawn's case had been on the television. "Someone told me," the kitchen porter said mysteriously. "Her body was hanging from a tree." Dawn's body wasn't hanging from a tree, but she was concealed beneath tree limbs and other debris. She was found inside an access gate leading from 10 Pound Lane to the fields. It was just a 10-minute walk from the M1 bridge. How did the kitchen porter have all the information about where Dawn's body was more than 12 hours before police found her body? After investigators learned all of this information, they went to his house to arrest him. The kitchen porter is Richard Buckland. Buckland was then driven to Wixton Police Station so he could be interrogated further. Buckland gave inconsistent statements to investigators, but did admit that he saw Dawn on the day she disappeared and that he did talk to her. Through his rambles, he at one point confessed to everything and then quickly took it all back. During the third interview with him, Buckland gave a detailed confession. He was able to give so many facts about the crime scene that were not public at the time. Before Richard Buckland went on trial, Dawn Ashworth was buried. For weeks after she was taken from a village footpath, she was buried in a little cemetery behind St. John Baptist Church in Enderby. The vicar described her as a bright, lively, charming young lady, obedient to her parents, loyal to her family, and full of the joy of life. 200 people showed up at the cemetery behind the stone church to bid farewell to Dawn. Investigators were still building up their case against Richard Buckland and heard about something called DNA testing. They were already convinced that he took Dawn's life and probably Lindemann's as well, but they figured they could try this new technology. All the DNA evidence from both crime scenes were sent to a young geneticist. He worked at Leicestershire University and claimed to have come up with a wondrous new discovery called genetic fingerprinting. The geneticist was Dr. Alec Jeffreys. Dr. Jeffreys was not sure how he could do what investigators wanted him to do. This sort of analysis had never been done before. Dr. Jeffreys first used his technique to resolve an immigration case and after that, a paternity dispute. This would be the first time that this new technology would be used in a criminal case to reveal the identity of a perpetrator. To everyone's surprise, when the DNA tests came back, it showed that Buckland was innocent and did not take Linda's life. Even more surprising, he did not take Dawn's life either. Dr. Jeffrey's tests were able to determine that investigators did at least get one thing right. It was the same man responsible for both crimes. Richard Buckland was then released and became the first person to be exonerated through the use of DNA profiling. Inspector Derek Pierce then took charge of the investigation. Pierce read 1,800 messages that came from the public. One of the messages pertained to a man whose name had popped up on the Linda Mann inquiry because he was unalibied and had a prior record for flashing. Of course, hundreds of names had been called in anonymously by wives, lovers, rivals, neighbors, and many of those names belonging to people with prior indecency arrests. This one wasn't worth special attention because in the earlier inquiry, he had been shown not to have moved to the village until 1 month after Linda's slaying. The message about him that the police received read, "You ought to have a look at a man in Littlethorpe named Colin Pitchfork." With there being so many unalibied men in the area, investigators came up with a new idea. They started to see what DNA could do, and decided that every unalibied male resident in the villages between ages of 17 and 34 years old would be asked to submit blood and saliva samples voluntarily. It was announced to the public on the 2nd of January 1987. Derek Pierce didn't believe the perpetrator was going to simply volunteer. He said, "We just hope it might somehow flush him out." By the end of January, 1,000 men had taken the tests and only a quarter of that number had been cleared. The forensic laboratory was swamped, and it seemed certain that the testing was going to take longer than the early estimation of 2 months. By May, 3,653 men had taken the tests, yet only 2,000 had been eliminated, due to the workload under which the laboratory technicians labored. Then, on September 18th of 1987, the police received a call that they had been waiting for. A woman called and said she heard a concerning conversation take place between a group of friends in the Clarendon pub in Leicester. One of the men, Ian Kelly, talked out loud about how he took the blood test for the investigation on behalf of a friend, Colin Pitchfork. Investigators looked into Pitchfork's file and saw his history of flashing women. They also saw that his signature from when they did house calls did not match the signature that he made or gave on the day he supposedly took the blood test. He was married to Carol Pitchfork. He worked at a bakery, and Pitchfork was known as a womanizer and had a string of affairs. On September 19th of 1987, Derek Pierce went to Ian Kelly's house to ask him some questions. Ian was also a baker and he worked with Colin Pitchfork. Ian at first denied taking Pitchfork's blood test, but then admitted it. Ian told Pierce what Pitchfork had told him. Pitchfork said that he was worried the police would assume he was responsible for what happened to Linda and Dawn based on his history of flashing. Pitchfork was a master manipulator and convinced Ian to go to the incident room and take the blood test on his behalf. Later that day, a group of investigators went to Pitchfork's house. Detective Mick Thomas gave it to him straight. "Inquiries that we have made, we believe you're responsible for taking Dawn Ashworth's life on the 31st of July, 1986. We believe another man gave a blood sample for you. I am arresting you. Do you understand?" Colin Pitchfork didn't deny it. His face said it all. He knew he had been caught. He even explained that he entered a photo of Ian Kelly in his passport so investigators would not suspect anything. When Carol Pitchfork entered the room, it was explained to her what was going on. She immediately started kicking and punching her husband. Understandably, investigators were slow to stop her. At the police station, Pitchfork first explained what he did to Linda Mann. He said that he planned on flashing her, but it turned into more when he realized she would recognize him one day. After he committed the crime, Pitchfork went back to his car where his and Carol's baby was tied up in his seat and went home. Pitchfork then told investigators what he did to Dawn Ashworth. Both crimes happened the exact same way. He told investigators that he knew what he was doing but could not stop himself from doing those things. Pitchfork also said that he tried to take Ian Kelly's life a few times to make sure he never talked, but his plans always failed. On January 22nd of 1988, 28-year-old Colin Pitchfork went on trial at the Crown Court in Leicester. Firstly, Ian Kelly was given an 18-month prison sentence suspended for 2 years, which meant he would not have to serve time. When Ian stepped out of the courtroom, he faced the media. "I was wrong for doing what I did. I am sorry for whoever I caused grievance to." Colin Pitchfork was dressed in summer clothes, jeans, and a short-sleeved shirt. He pleaded guilty to taking the lives of both Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. He received a double life sentence for his crimes. Much to the astonishment of investigators, the judge did not give a recommendation for a minimum term. Without such a recommendation, the life sentence in Britain was similar to that in the United States, which meant that Colin Pitchfork could conceivably be released in 10 or 12 years. The police were outraged. Man's stepfather, Eddie Eastwood, said, "Pitchfork looked at me eye to eye. He just stared at me as if to say, 'Well, what's the matter with you?' I could not make him out. He looked almost human." Linda's mother, Kathleen, said, "It was the shock of seeing him. I did not look up when the lawyer passed those photos of Linda to the bench. Those photos of how she looked when they found her. The cover dropped open and the audience gasped when they saw the photos. My brother saw them and cried. Luckily, I did not look up. He must never be allowed to walk the streets again. He should hang. With this new DNA genetic fingerprint, there is no chance of a person being later proved innocent after he has been hanged. There is no excuse anymore." When all the dust settled, investigators still faced the question of why Richard Buckland knew so many details of the crime scene of Dawn Ashworth. They believe that he stumbled upon her body on his way to work. He has often been described as the village idiot, and it is believed that played a part in why he confessed. The cases of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth are seen as a big reason why DNA technology has advanced so much. Today, thousands of cold cases have been solved thanks to Dr. Alec Jeffries. In June 1986, a quiet afternoon in North Miami Beach, Florida turned fatal. The final words of the victim were, "Do not shoot." For nearly 4 decades, the case remained unsolved until a breakthrough came. Shirley Brandt was born on June 14, 1936, and grew up in Florida. In the 1960s, she pursued a career in entertainment, performing as a singer on cruise ships alongside her sister. The stage lights and applause marked the beginning of Shirley's professional journey. However, by the early 1970s, she shifted her focus to real estate. She began her real estate career by selling residential homes. It was not long before Shirley set her sights higher, transitioning into commercial real estate. Outside of her career, Shirley was devoted to her family and community. She was married to Dr. Lawrence Brandt, a well-known dentist in their area, and together they raised 4 children. Shirley actively participated in charitable efforts, especially those supporting Soviet Jews during the Refusnik movement. On June 13, 1986, everything changed. Shirley was at work in her second-story office at Brandt Realty Corporation, located on Northeast 18th Avenue. She was on the phone chatting with a friend while a coworker nearby was quietly focused on entering data into a computer. According to the police, 2 men walked into the office without warning. One of them immediately turned aggressive, demanding that Shirley hang up the phone. The authorities would later describe the incident as an attempted robbery. But when Shirley refused and began to scream, the man responded with fatal force. Despite her desperate final words, "Do not shoot," he fired a shot directly at her face. The phone receiver was ripped from the landline base and left beneath her desk as both men fled the scene. Emergency responders rushed Shirley to Parkway Regional Hospital, but the damage was irreversible. She succumbed to her injuries not long after arriving. The autopsy confirmed that Shirley's life was ended by the single gunshot wound to the head. The investigators acted swiftly, collecting fingerprints from around the scene, including prints on the phone found under Shirley's desk. But despite this evidence, the case began to unravel. For reasons that remain unclear even decades later, the prints were never submitted to the automated fingerprint identification system, a database that might have helped identify a suspect early on. It was a critical opportunity missed in the pursuit of justice for Shirley. At the time of the shooting, a witness present in the office described the 2 suspects as nicely dressed. Both men were seen wearing dress pants and long-sleeve collared shirts. The investigators believes that this deliberate choice of attire may have been a tactic to appear professional and avoid drawing attention to themselves. After the shooting, the suspects did not just flee the scene. They took cash and credit cards with them, adding theft to the violence they had already committed. In a desperate bid for answers, Shirley's family offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the man responsible for the shooting. The weapon was described as a small-caliber firearm, but beyond that, there were no solid leads. With no arrests, no suspects, and no further developments, the investigation eventually lost momentum. Time passed and the trail grew cold. But in January 2023, almost 37 years after the crime took place, the North Miami Beach Police Department launched a new cold case unit to review unsolved cases. The investigators revisited Shirley's case and uncovered the original fingerprints collected from the crime scene. These prints were resubmitted using updated forensic technology. On March 21, 2025, the breakthrough finally came. A match was found. The fingerprints were linked to 64-year-old Jeffrey Taylor. He was arrested on April 24, 2025 and charged in the second degree with using a firearm. Taylor was booked into the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center in Miami, where he remains held without bond. Shirley's son, Ben Brandt, spoke at a press conference outside the North Miami Beach Police Headquarters, describing his mother as a trailblazer who broke barriers and gave generously to philanthropic causes. In the weeks following Shirley's demise in 1986, her husband turned grief into action. He launched the Shirley Brandt Memorial Fund against handgun crime, aimed at addressing the growing threat of gun violence. He said at the time, people have been calling up and saying, "What can I do?" What they can do is they can vote for elected officials who want to do something about gun control. He also offered a pointed response to the NRA's slogan, stating, "Guns do not end people's lives. People with guns end people's lives." Dr. Lawrence Brandt remained dedicated to that cause until his passing in 2016. North Miami Beach Police Chief Juan Pinillos underscored the importance of the development, stating, "As the pursuit of full accountability for Shirley's case moves forward." In October 2001, a 25-year-old woman vanished after leaving her boyfriend's home in Willard, despite years of funding billboards and chasing leads in a relentless search for answers. A breakthrough would only happen more than 2 decades later. Regina Roe Hicks was born on September 13, 1976 in Norwalk, Huron County, Ohio, to Laquella and Raleigh Roe. She grew up in the nearby town of Willard. She was a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars in Willard and actively participated in community activities. As a young adult, she married Paul Hicks, and the couple had one son, Montana Hicks. Though the marriage began with promise, it eventually deteriorated. By 2001, Regina and Paul were estranged. Despite the marital struggles, Regina remained a devoted mother, always putting her son's needs first, even when she started a new relationship. On the evening of October 18, 2001, 25-year-old Regina was last seen leaving her boyfriend's home around 8 p.m. in her white Chevrolet Camaro. She told him she was going to pick up her son. Tragically, she never arrived at her destination. Concern quickly spread among her loved ones, who knew something was terribly wrong. Her family launched a frantic search. At the time, Paul, her estranged husband, made a chilling call to Chad Roe, Regina's brother, saying ominously, "They think she's in the pond." That comment would later raise serious suspicions. The police were notified, but jurisdictional confusion between Willard Police and the Huron County Sheriff's Office created immediate complications. Chad later criticized the early handling of the case, saying the officials dropped the ball during the most critical moments of the investigation. As days passed with no word from Regina, anxiety turned to dread. Family, friends, and the community desperately hoped for a miracle. But what followed would confirm their worst fears. On October 22nd, for days after she went missing, Regina's white Camaro was discovered submerged in a pond near Section Line Road 30 in Willard. Inside the vehicle, in the passenger seat, was Regina's lifeless body. An autopsy revealed bruising on her head, pointing to foul play. The authorities then ruled out the case as an accident. From the beginning, the case was riddled with problems. Confusion over jurisdiction, mishandling of the scene, and slow progress stalled the investigation. Still, Regina's mother, Laquella Holbrook, refused to accept silence as a verdict. For over a decade, she poured her heart and finances into the search for justice, paying for billboards, offering a $20,000 reward, placing newspaper ads, and even conducting interviews with potential witnesses. Laquella's efforts were heroic, but they took a toll. The emotional burden and physical strain ultimately led to her declining health. She was diagnosed with cancer and passed away without seeing her daughter's perpetrator brought to justice. Despite the emotional fatigue, Chad kept his sister's memory alive. He He never stopped asking questions, never stopped pressing for answers. In 2024, after more than 2 decades, new hope emerged in the form of Ashley Ford, a community activist and podcaster known for her work on cold cases. With the Rowe family's blessing, Ford began producing episodes about Regina's unsolved case, digging into old evidence, reading Licella's notes, and contacting the local authorities. Ford's podcast caught public attention and reignited interest in the case. She approached the investigation with a mother's empathy and a journalist's persistence. Her episodes struck a chord with listeners, and soon the case was no longer just a local tragedy. It became a symbol of community-led justice. Ford said, "Reading through the mom's notes is so hard. To know she passed away never getting justice and she was so close, I started where she stopped." After Ford's coverage, agents from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation visited Chad, something they had not done in years. That visit signaled a turning point. It appeared the wheels of justice were finally turning again. Chad expressed cautious optimism, saying, "I am hoping within the next year or so we can get it all solved and get the right people that need to be in jail. On April 23, 2025, nearly 24 years after the case was opened, the long-awaited breakthrough came. Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost and Huron County Prosecutor James Siderly announced that 50-year-old Paul Hicks, living in Sandusky, had been indicted on 3 counts of slaying and 1 count of kidnapping. He was arrested by agents from BCI and the U.S. Marshal Service in Seneca County. He was not a stranger to criminal allegations. In 2019, he had turned himself in after being wanted for 4 years in connection to an elaborate arson scheme where he attempted to have his own home burned down. Prior to the fire, cameras captured 2 people entering the home carrying gas cans. They can be seen removing 2 large TVs and dousing the inside of the house. Hicks tried blaming the fire on his ex-girlfriend and pointed her out in the video. He went to extremes to frame her. He had another woman purchase a custom mask from a company called That's My Face and had her buy a wig that matched his ex's hair. Hicks also bought a video surveillance system and protected the recording device inside a fireproof box so that the so-called evidence would survive. The investigators questioned the ex-girlfriend, but she was cleared. In 2019, Hicks was indicted on aggravated arson, perjury, and insurance fraud charges. The case went through years of court appearances and continuations. Ultimately, Hicks took a plea deal, pleading no contest, and was found guilty on a misdemeanor insurance fraud charge. He was sentenced to community control. Civilly, though, Allstate won its case, and Hicks agreed to pay $400,000 to the insurance company. These past allegations painted a troubling picture of Hicks' history and character. During a press conference, Attorney General Yost said, "Now it is up to us to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law." Though the legal process is expected to be long, for Chad and the memory of his mother, Laquella, the arrest of Paul Hicks is a long overdue first step in securing justice for Regina. The investigation remains ongoing, and the authorities continue to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Attorney General Dave Yost said, "Now it is up to us to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt beyond a court of law." Hicks was arraigned and he entered a plea of not guilty. His bond was set at $2 million. In December 2002, a pregnant wife went missing from their Modesto, California home. As loved ones searched frantically and police launched an investigation, the public watched in horror as what began as a missing person case quickly unraveled into something far darker. Lacey Peterson was born Lacey Denise Rocha on May 4, 1975 in Escalon, California, to Sharon and Dennis Robert Rocha. She was the youngest of 2 children. When Lacey was just 2 years old, her parents divorced and Sharon moved with her children to Modesto, while Dennis remained on the family's dairy farm. Lacey spent weekends visiting her father at the farm, maintaining a connection to her rural roots. Sharon soon entered into a long-term relationship with Ron Gransky, who, although never legally married to Sharon, became a father figure to Lacey and her brother. Lacey thrived in her early years, both socially and academically. She became a cheerleader during junior high and continued through high school. She graduated from Thomas Downey High School and pursued higher education at California Polytechnic State University. There, she majored in ornamental horticulture. In mid-1994, Lacey's life took a new turn when she met Scott Peterson. Struck by their immediate connection, Lacey gave him her phone number and later confided in her mother that she believed she had met the man she would marry. Scott eventually called and the two began dating. As their relationship deepened, Scott chose to set aside his ambition of becoming a professional golfer, deciding instead to focus on a stable business career. This marked the beginning of their serious commitment to building a life together. After dating for 2 years, Lacey and Scott moved in together, and in 1997, they got married at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. Their relationship appeared solid and hopeful as they embarked on married life. In October 2000, they purchased a charming 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow on Covina Avenue, nestled in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park in Modesto. Professionally, the couple seemed well established. Lacey worked part-time as a substitute teacher, a role that suited her nurturing nature. Meanwhile, Scott secured a position with Trade Corp USA, a newly launched branch of a European fertilizer company. His job came with a monthly salary of $5,000 before taxes, giving the couple a degree of financial stability as they planned for the next phase of their life together. In 2002, the couple received joyful news. Lacey was pregnant. Her due date was set for February 10, 2003, and they had already chosen a name for their unborn son, Connor. As her pregnancy progressed, Lacey embraced the experience with happiness and excitement. Life felt full and promising, yet behind the surface of this seemingly idyllic chapter, an unseen danger loomed, one that Lacey could never have anticipated. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Scott Peterson returned home from a solo fishing trip to the Berkeley Marina, only to find that his pregnant wife, Lacey, was missing. Concerned, he called Lacey's mother, who immediately contacted other family members. The family gathered at the Peterson home and began reaching out to friends and neighbors in search of any information about Lacey's whereabouts. As the situation grew more serious, Lacey's stepfather, Ron, contacted the Modesto Police Department and filed a missing person report, prompting the first official steps in what would become a widely publicized investigation. When the Modesto police officers arrived at the Peterson residence, they conducted a preliminary interview with Scott and did a cursory search of the house. Scott told the detectives that he had gone fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina about 90 miles away from Modesto. He claimed that Lacey had been home earlier that morning watching a Martha Stewart television program about meringue, preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog, Mackenzie, to a nearby park. He said that upon returning that afternoon, Lacey's vehicle was in the driveway, the house was empty, and he had found Mackenzie alone in the backyard, still wearing his leash. Inside the home, the police found Lacey's keys, wallet, sunglasses, and purse stored in a closet, raising questions about her abrupt disappearance. As news of Lacey's vanishing spread, an intensive search effort quickly mobilized. On December 25th, more than 900 individuals, including friends, family members, and neighbors, joined the search, canvassing the area and posting missing person flyers. The authorities offered a $25,000 reward for information about Lacey's whereabouts. That amount soon increased to $250,000 and was eventually raised to $500,000 in the hopes of encouraging new leads. Though the case initially lacked concrete evidence of foul play, the investigators harbored growing suspicions. Scott's demeanor and actions began drawing scrutiny from the detectives, who noted inconsistencies in his statements and behavior. As days passed without new clues, the authorities grew more concerned that something more sinister had occurred. Just days after Lacey was reported missing, the detectives received a tip that shifted the direction of the investigation significantly and placed Scott under intense suspicion. Amber Fry, a massage therapist from Fresno, came forward with startling information. She informed the detectives that she had been romantically involved with Scott for over a month and had believed he was single. On December 30th, Amber disclosed that she had met Scott on November 20th and he had told her he was unattached. Even more disturbingly, she recalled Scott telling her on December 9th, 2 weeks before Lacey vanished, that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without a wife. Amber's testimony radically altered the course of the investigation. The timeline she provided suggested that Scott may have been planning Lacey's crime well before her disappearance. Hoping to gather incriminating evidence, the detectives equipped Amber with a recording device to capture her conversations with Scott. On April 13, 2003, the long search for Lacey and her unborn child came to a grim conclusion. While walking their dog along the shoreline, two individuals discovered the remains of a male fetus. The fetus was found in the San Francisco Bay Area, near the Richmond shoreline. The next day, on April 14th, a jogger stumbled upon a partial human torso in the riprap along the Point Isabel shoreline just about a mile from where the fetus had been found. The remains were severely decomposed, but their proximity raised immediate concern for investigators who had been closely monitoring the area since Lacey's disappearance. DNA testing confirmed the worst fears of Lacey's family and the investigative team. On April 18th, forensic analysis verified that the two sets of remains were those of Lacey and her unborn son, Connor. The results marked a turning point in the case, formally shifting it from a missing persons investigation to a slaying case. Lacey's remains were in a horrifying state. Her body was bloated and missing significant parts, including her head and arms. Her internal organs were also absent, and what remained showed signs of advanced decomposition. An autopsy revealed disturbing findings. Lacey had suffered 2 cracked ribs and fractures to her neck bones, though it was unclear whether these injuries occurred before or after her demise. Despite the severe damage, her uterus and cervix were found intact, a detail that raised more questions about the nature and timeline of the crime. The condition of her body and the separation of her remains from the fetus presented a complex forensic challenge. Still, the discovery provided crucial evidence that would strengthen the case against Scott. The location of the remains also drew significant attention. The shoreline where the bodies were found was just a few miles from the Berkeley Marina, where Scott claimed he had gone fishing on the day of Lacey's disappearance. This geographic connection deepened investigators' suspicions and solidified their focus on Scott as the primary suspect. With the confirmation of Lacey's and Connor's demises, the authorities were able to escalate their investigative efforts and prepare for an arrest. By this time, Scott had been staying in San Diego with his family, stating that he was trying to avoid the relentless media attention that followed the case. However, his behavior raised additional red flags for investigators. On April 18th, the same day the DNA results were confirmed, the police located and arrested Scott at a golf course in San Diego. The circumstances of his arrest would only add to the suspicion surrounding him. At the time of his arrest, Scott was carrying over $10,000 in cash, multiple cell phones, camping gear, and his brother's identification. These items suggested the possibility that Scott was preparing to flee or go into hiding, a theory that further supported law enforcement's decision to take him into custody. The arrest brought a dramatic turn in the case that had captivated the nation, and it signaled the beginning of the legal proceedings against Scott. Scott Peterson was formally arraigned on April 21st, facing 2 counts of slaying, one for his wife and the other for their unborn son. Although the prosecution believed that Scott had planned and executed the crime, the case lacked direct physical evidence tying him to the crime. No weapon was recovered and there were no eyewitnesses to the act. Nevertheless, circumstantial evidence and Scott's behavior following Lacey's disappearance played a major role in shaping the prosecution's case. One of the key challenges for prosecutors was the timeline. According to Scott, he had left the house that morning to go fishing, and the tight window of time raised doubts about whether he could have committed the crime and transported the bodies without being seen. Some witnesses claimed they had seen Lacey walking her dog after Scott had already left for his trip, suggesting the possibility she may have been abducted. However, the investigators deemed these sightings unreliable, citing inconsistencies and the lack of corroborating details. Despite these uncertainties, the case proceeded to trial. Public interest remained high throughout the proceedings, and the courtroom was packed with media and observers as the details of the investigation unfolded. On November 12, 2004, the jury reached a verdict. Scott was found guilty on both counts. On March 16, 2005, Scott was formally sentenced to his end by lethal injection. He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he joined hundreds of other inmates on California's Capital Punishment Row. Years later, the case would return to the headlines. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court reviewed Scott's sentence and determined that there had been significant errors during jury selection. The court ruled that potential jurors had been improperly dismissed for expressing general objections to the end-of-life penalty, a violation of Scott's right to a fair sentencing process. As a result, the court overturned the sentence, though it left the conviction itself intact. Following the court's decision, Scott was returned to San Mateo County for resentencing. In December 2021, the court issued its final decision. Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. With that, the legal process reached a new conclusion, one that ensured Scott would spend the rest of his life behind bars, even as the emotional scars of Lacey and Connor's demises continued to linger. In 2025, more than 2 decades after the crime took place, the case came back in the news. In late April, the Los Angeles Innocence Project made a bombshell announcement. The nonprofit declared in a court filing that after a year-long investigation, it had uncovered new evidence that eviscerates the prosecution's theory of what occurred and proves Scott's innocence. The Los Angeles Innocence Project presents new evidence showing a home across the street from the Petersons that was burgled the day of Lacey's disappearance, and that a witness reportedly heard a conversation between the burglars that Lacey saw them and confronted them. The organization also says it has obtained new sworn statements from witnesses who reported seeing Lacey in the neighborhood after the prosecutors claimed that Scott ended her life. It also argues that it has uncovered new evidence linking the burglars to a van that was set on a fire nearby and had a mattress inside with apparent bloodstains. The filing states that the prosecution suppressed evidence of the police investigation into that incident and that it has not been subjected to more precise DNA testing to establish a link to Lacey's case. A key argument from last month's filing emphasizes that new research and methods to determine fetal growth indicate that the Petersons' unborn child was older than the prosecution's expert witness, Dr. Gregory DeVore said, meaning Lacey's life was ended days after the prosecution claimed. Included in the petition was a declaration from Scott describing his behavior in his marriage as denying he played a role in the demise of his wife and their unborn child. He wrote, "I have steadfastly maintained my innocence from the moment my wife went missing on December 24, 2002, throughout my trial, appeal, and post-conviction proceedings and to this day. I had absolutely nothing to do with the disappearance and ends of my wife and son. Now it is up to the court to decide if Scott will receive a new trial." Kathy and Small. On February 22, 1986, a woman's body was discovered on a remote road in South Pasadena, California. The scene was chilling, with the victim found wearing only a nightgown, having been both stabbed and strangled. Kathy and Small, a devoted mother, had her life cruelly taken. The pursuit of justice for her murder would span 3 decades, but a shocking revelation eventually emerged, linking her case to one of California's most notorious serial offenders. Born in 1967, Kathy and Small was known for her loving and caring nature, especially when it came to her family. By the time she turned 19, Kathy was already a mother of 2 young children, fully embracing the responsibilities of motherhood while also being a protective big sister and devoted daughter. On the morning of February 22, 1986, a woman's body was found on a road in South Pasadena. She was dressed only in a nightgown, and it was evident that she had endured a violent attack. Authorities observed that she had been both stabbed and strangled, with no identification found at the scene. Her lifeless body provided little information, and for days, the mystery of her identity remained unsolved. That is until a breakthrough came from a man in Lake Elsinore who had seen a newspaper story about the murder. He contacted authorities, believing the victim might be his roommate, Kathy and Small. This pivotal lead quickly redirected the focus of the investigation, and the man was able to positively identify Kathy as the woman found in South Pasadena. According to the man, Kathy had been living with him in Lake Elsinore for a few months and had been working as a prostitute in the area. His revelation painted a different picture of Kathy's recent life, one that was unknown to her family in France. He shared with the detectives that Kathy had left his house the night before her body was discovered, wearing the same nightgown in which she was found. It was a chilling detail that would later tie directly into the events leading up to her tragic end. The man further explained that Kathy had told him she was meeting someone named Bill that night. Kathy had mentioned that Bill had given her $50 to drive with him to Los Angeles, a detail that provided investigators with a potential lead on who might have been involved in her murder. With Kathy's identity confirmed and new information about her final hours emerging, detectives focused on uncovering the truth about what happened the night she met Bill. Over the years, detectives pursued several leads in Kathy's case, but none brought them closer to solving the crime. The breakthrough came 3 decades later when a sheriff's detective received a call from an investigator with the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner. The examiner had been at the scene of a natural death at a residence directly across the street from where Kathy's body had been discovered 33 years earlier. Inside the home, a 63-year-old man had been found lifeless on his living room couch. He lived alone and had no children, but the investigation into his home would prove crucial to Kathy's cold case. While examining the deceased man's home, the coroner's investigator made a disturbing discovery. Scattered among his belongings were numerous photographs of women who appeared to have been given illegal substances, assaulted, and possibly held against their will. These troubling images suggested a dark side to the man's life. Further raising suspicion was a newspaper article found in his bedroom, which reported the identification of Kathy Small as the victim found stabbed and strangled in South Pasadena in 1986. The eerie coincidence of the article and the photos prompted investigators to revisit Kathy's unsolved case. With this significant link, the detectives sought a search warrant for the home, hoping to uncover evidence that could connect the deceased man to Kathy's demise. Several items were recovered and sent for DNA testing, with the hope that modern forensic analysis could finally provide answers. The criminalists tested these items, searching for any trace of DNA that could tie the man to the crime scene or Kathy herself. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn. DNA tests revealed that the decedent's DNA did not match the DNA found on Kathy. Despite the disturbing items in his possession and the proximity of his home to the crime scene, the man was ultimately not linked to her slaying. His DNA did not correspond with any known criminal cases, leaving detectives with a setback. Yet, the investigation was far from over. With the case reopened, detectives decided to retrieve all the original evidence that had been held since 1986. The materials were transported to the Sheriff's Crime Lab in Los Angeles for comprehensive DNA analysis, using advanced technology unavailable years before. This new analysis of the old evidence ultimately unlocked the mystery that had haunted Kathy's case for over 3 decades, providing long-awaited answers to the questions. On August 19, 2020, Slang detectives received a pivotal notification from a criminalist that significantly advanced the investigation. DNA tests conducted on the assault kit and the victim's clothing revealed the presence of DNA from 2 male donors. One of the individuals was identified as William Lester Suff, a convicted serial offender with a notorious reputation. Known as the Riverside prostitute perpetrator or the Lake Elsinore perpetrator, Suff had been responsible for a string of brutal slayings in Southern California. Suff's criminal history was extensive and horrifying. In January 1992, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop, which eventually led to his conviction for the end of 12 women in Riverside County between 1989 and 1991. His violent spree earned him an end-of-life sentence, and he had been on capital punishment for those cases. But Suff's criminal history stretched back even further. He had been convicted in 1974 for taking the life of his own 2-month-old daughter in Texas. For that crime, Suff was sentenced to 70 years in prison, but he was paroled in 1984 and moved to California, where his slaying spree resumed. After the DNA match in Kathy Small's case, detectives knew they were on the verge of a breakthrough. In May 2022, Suff was transported from San Quentin Prison to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Men's Central Jail for questioning. Over the course of 2 days, the detectives interviewed him about Kathy. During these interviews, Suff confessed to ending her life and provided disturbing details about her final moments. His confession also included admissions to some of his previous slayings in Riverside County, further solidifying his brutal legacy. William Mustersuf remains on Execution Row at San Quentin State Prison, where he is awaiting execution for his convictions. A press conference was held in August 2024. Lieutenant Thomas read a statement from Kathy's younger sister, Deanna Larson, who lives out of state. Deanna was 10 at the time her sister lost her life, but said that she sensed her sister was trying to get her life on track. She said in her statement, before she could take another step forward, her life was ended. The man who ended my sister also destroyed me, my family, and the family of others. I don't know why Kathy decided to go with Bill that night. I have spent nearly my entire life trying to understand who took the life of my sweet sister. I think of her every day. Moving on to the next case. Helen Terry. On August 28, 1980, a young mother was brutally murdered in her Sacramento, California apartment. The crime scene, marked by 13 stab wounds and a terrified 1-year-old crawling through the aftermath, became one of the city's most enduring unsolved cases for over 4 decades. Investigators faced numerous challenges in identifying Helen Terry's killer until, decades later, an arrest was finally made. Helen, 27 years old, lived in the Orangewood West Apartments on Wyndham Drive in Sacramento. Known for her deep devotion to her family, Helen was a loving and hardworking mother, determined to provide the best life possible for her 1-year-old son. At the center of Helen's life at the time was an ongoing paternity suit against Robert Terry, who was believed to be the biological father of her son. Helen was seeking child support from Robert in the hope of securing financial stability for her child's future. On August 28, 1980, a neighbor witnessed a disturbing scene unfold outside Helen's apartment. The neighbor saw a man aggressively pounding on her door, followed by chaotic sounds from inside the apartment. Shuffling noises and blood-curdling screams echoed through the walls. The commotion outside painted a terrifying picture of the violence unfolding behind closed doors. Fearing for her own safety, the neighbor hesitated to intervene and could not call the police, as she didn't have a phone. Shortly afterward, another resident in the complex complained of water leaking into their unit. When the apartment manager entered Helen's apartment to investigate the leak, he discovered a horrifying scene. Helen had been brutally stabbed 13 times and was left to die on the bathroom floor. The water that had caused concern was from a running faucet, adding to the disarray of the crime scene. Her 1-year-old son was found alone in the apartment. Crawling through the aftermath of the vicious attack, the police were immediately called to the scene, and investigators quickly began piecing together what had transpired. Blood stains were scattered throughout the apartment and furniture was overturned, indicating a violent struggle had taken place. It was clear that Helen had fought desperately against her attacker before succumbing to her fatal injuries. Despite the clues left behind, including the chaotic state of the apartment and the extensive blood evidence, identifying a suspect would prove to be a challenging task. Sacramento police launched an intense investigation into Helen's slaying. They combed through the evidence, interviewed residents, and pursued every possible lead in hopes of catching the perpetrator. A $2,500 reward was offered to encourage anyone with information to come forward. However, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community's desire for justice, no suspect was identified. The case gradually grew cold as detectives found themselves unable to develop any tangible leads or witnesses to push the investigation forward. Years went by with no answers, and Helen's case remained one of Sacramento's many unsolved cases. However, in February 2016, hope was reignited when an investigator from the department's cold case unit decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. With advances in DNA technology, investigators were then able to re-examine the physical evidence collected from the crime scene in the hope of finding new leads. As the cold case team processed the old evidence, a major breakthrough occurred. DNA found at the crime scene of Helen pointed to a familiar name, Robert Terry, the man Helen had been embroiled in a paternity and child support dispute with at the time of her demise. This discovery immediately raised suspicions, as Robert had been a figure in Helen's life during a tumultuous period, but he had never been formally charged or named a suspect in the years following her slaying. Despite the promising DNA evidence linking Robert to the crime scene, detectives faced significant challenges. They needed more than just a DNA match to build a solid case against him. Investigators found themselves in a difficult position, knowing that while the DNA provided a potential lead, it was not enough to definitively place Robert at the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. There were still gaps in the timeline and insufficient corroborating evidence to bring charges against him. In 2024, new developments in Helen's case emerged when the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office Cold Case, Science and Technology Unit took on the decades-old investigation. Using advanced investigative methods, detectives uncovered enough new evidence to finally charge Robert Terry with the slaying of Helen Terry. On September 27, 2024, 81-year-old Robert, residing in Rancho Cordova, was arrested and booked into Sacramento County Jail. Authorities have not yet confirmed whether Robert was the biological father of Helen's one-year-old son. Their contentious relationship, compounded by the unresolved paternity dispute, remained at the center of the investigation. The police continued to examine their interactions and what role the paternity issue may have played in the motive behind the slaying. Robert Terry is set to appear in court for a bail hearing on October 17th, where further details about the case may come to light. His arrest at this late stage in life brought a shocking conclusion to a cold case that had stumped detectives for over 4 decades. Helen's brother, John Mays, said, "She was very kind, very loving. That's why we can't even imagine something like that happening to her. It was totally uncalled for. We've been wondering since day one, and this is the first bit of hope we've had since then. And we're going to take it as far as we can. We had suspicions, but there wasn't much we could do with just suspicions. When it finally came down to us, it was like a huge relief, like something we had known all along but could never prove." Moving on to the next case. Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. On June 21, 2000, in Winter Park, Florida, a resident noticed cats playing with an object and went to investigate. The object turned out to be a human skull, discovered at the Orange County apartment community. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office responded and conducted a search of the area. Additional skeletal remains, along with clothing, were found partially buried in a nearby vacant lot. A small caliber firearm was also recovered near the remains. After the autopsy was conducted, forensic anthropologists determined that the remains were that of a white male between the ages of 40-60 years. The man's remains had been buried for approximately 7 to 8 years prior to discovery. They determined that he lost his life after he had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, as there was a hole in his skull. Due to a lack of victimology, the case went cold. The sheriff's office submitted forensic evidence to Athram Labs in August 2022, 22 years after the unknown man's remains were first discovered. DNA was extracted from the remains, and in January 2024, Athram identified the individual as Paul Lawrence Larry Rozier Jr. He was born on October 29, 1951, and was around 40 years old at the time of his death. Larry grew up in the Winter Park area with his siblings and graduated from Orlando's Colonial Park High School. The Orange County Sheriff's Office encourages anyone with information that could assist in solving Larry Rozier's case to contact Detective Lowen at 407-254-7000. Moving on to the next case. Catherine Namath. In October 2002, Catherine Namath visited her parents' cabin on Noon Lake, Wisconsin, on a rainy night. The cabin was empty as her parents had left earlier that day for their winter home in Florida. Namath had stopped by to grab some food from the freezer. A few minutes after arriving, she called for help on her radio. She used her radio identification number saying, "This is 96. There's a man with a raincoat, and he's scruffy looking," and then the radio went dead. Her husband tried to contact her by radio without success. He then decided to go to the cabin with their son. When they arrived at the cabin, they found Namath lying on the floor. She was still breathing and was semi-conscious. They asked her if she knew the attacker, but she said she didn't know. She died while being airlifted to the hospital. Officials said that nothing was stolen and that it didn't appear to be a random attack. Evidence from the cabin showed that she was chased through the property trying to fight off her attacker but received multiple stab wounds. Police have DNA evidence but have been unable to match it to anyone. Some speculated that the killing might be linked to an embezzlement investigation involving her husband and 3 others from the Elko Fire Department Board. The investigation was eventually resolved when the former treasurer admitted to embezzling at least $3,500 and was dismissed. Despite this, there have been no suspects or new leads, and Catherine's murder remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Gary Lee Haney. On January 3, 1979, a duck hunter stumbled upon human remains belonging to a male, tangled in fishing line on the tide flats near Spencer Island, just south of Marysville, Washington. The Snohomish County Coroner's Office labeled the victim John Doe 791, as he was the first John Doe found that year. Despite efforts from Coroner Robert Phillips, the cause of death remained unclear. By March 1979, the man had still not been identified, and the Cassidy Funeral Home laid him to rest at Cypress Lawn Cemetery in Everett, Washington. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office later revisited the location where the remains were discovered, but found no additional evidence. Over the years, the case went cold. In February 2008, Detective Jim Scharf from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team, alongside retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Kausert, began to re-examine the unidentified persons case. With advancements in DNA technology, they hoped to exhume the remains to collect DNA samples that had not been taken during the initial investigation. However, the process of reviewing the case, obtaining exhumation permits, and conducting DNA testing would take several years. In July 2015, the remains of the John Doe were exhumed from Cypress Lawn Cemetery, with officials from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and the Medical Examiner's Office present. The remains were then transported to the Medical Examiner's Office for further examination and given the name Spencer Island Doe. Additionally, forensic odontologist Dr. Kyle Tanaka took dental radiographs and uploaded them to NCIC and NAMUS, hoping to find a match with a missing person. NCIC, the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, is a computerized system that tracks crimes and missing persons, allowing law enforcement agencies nationwide to compare cases. However, no dental matches were found in the NCIC database. In February, forensic artist Natalie Murray took measurements and photographs and drew a facial reconstruction of what the John Doe may have looked like in life. In February, Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist at the King County Medical Examiner's Office, performed an examination of the remains and estimated that they belonged to an adult male with Caucasian ancestry between 50 to 56 in height and between 27 to 61 years old. In September of 2018, a section of the right femur was sent to the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center for DNA extraction and was uploaded to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System. From 2018 to 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner investigators ruled out numerous missing persons by circumstances, testing, and dental records. In 2021, the Medical Examiner's Office began collaborating with Othram Incorporated to obtain an advanced DNA profile suitable for investigative genetic genealogy. In January of 2021, a section of the femur bone from Spencer Island John Doe was sent to Othram. The funding for the laboratory work in this case was generously provided through DNAsolves.com. In May of 2021, Othram successfully obtained a DNA extract that was sufficient for testing after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. Biogeographical analysis of the DNA profile revealed that the John Doe was in fact Caucasian. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office uploaded the Othram DNA profile to genealogical databases that allow law enforcement to search and obtain several matches. Adam Wilcoxon built ancestry trees from several of the top matches and found a male who went missing in the Everett, Washington area in the late 1970s named Gary Lee Haney. DNA reference testing of Gary's half-sister ultimately confirmed that Spencer Island Doe was Gary Lee Haney, who was about 29 years old when he went missing. The identification was made in March of 2023. Gary was apparently not reported missing, or at least investigators found no record of that. He was born in Topeka, Kansas, and traveled the world with his mother and adoptive father, who was in the Air Force. Gary loved the Beatles and to play the piano. His parents both passed away when he was young, and he got estranged from the rest of his relatives. so the only photos of him are as a child. The circumstances of his disappearance are not known. Gary's cousin, Hal Thane from Texas, was able to provide a lot of information. He said, "It is a relief and closure to know about Gary." He also said that Gary Lee Haney was born Gary Joseph Condamiti on September 23, 1950. His mother, Bernice Schaefer, and his biological father divorced when he was very young. Around 1955, his mother remarried to Sheldon Lee Haney, who adopted him and renamed him Gary Lee Haney, legally changing even his middle name to match his stepfather. Hal Thane, now 71, saw his cousin Gary in person maybe twice in his life when they were both kids. His uncle Sheldon served in the Air Force, so the family lived in places all across the country from Kansas to New York City. His clearest memories of his cousin are captured in a few precious black and white pictures. Young Gary cradling a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Young Gary holding a bigger dog's leash beside his mother in a pale dress, and his stepfather in a white dress shirt and slacks. Young Gary with his front teeth peeking out from a half smile on what looks like a school picture day. Hal Thane said Gary had some sort of a mental disorder. Given what he knows, he wonders if Gary lived with autism. He'd heard another family member describe him as schizophrenic in adulthood. Gary's biological father, Joseph Condamiti, passed away at a Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was about 16. His mother passed away when he was 19. His adoptive father completed his military service and worked at Boeing until his retirement. The family lived in the Everett area from the early 1970s until at least 1990. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the Snohomish Police Department at 360-568-0888. Wanda Lee Brewer. In September 1979, a hunter discovered skeletal remains along Highway 175 between mile markers 0.80 and 0.83 in Lake County, California, just northwest of Sacramento. Investigators responded to the scene and determined the remains belonged to a female whose ancestry could not definitively identified. The woman was estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old at the time of her death, which was believed to have occurred between 1976 and 1979. The woman's height was estimated to be between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 4 inches, but no other identifying characteristics could be determined. In June 2019, details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, her identity remained a mystery for nearly 5 decades due to the limited identifying information available. Over the years, the Lake County Sheriff's Office continued to collaborate with the California Department of Justice, utilizing emerging technology in hopes of identifying Jane Doe. In 2023, the California Department of Justice, in collaboration with the Lake County Sheriff's Office, submitted forensic evidence to Arthram, hopes that advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy could help generate new leads to identify the woman. Arthram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown woman. Once the profile was successfully built, Arthram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team produced new investigative leads that were provided to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. Using these new leads, the Lake County Sheriff's Office continued their investigation, which led to genetic relatives of the woman. A reference sample was collected from a potential relative and compared to the DNA profile of the woman. After nearly 50 years, this comparison confirmed the identity of Lake County Jane Doe as Wanda Lee Brewer. She was born in Arkansas and later moved to California. An investigation into the circumstances around Wanda's demise continues. Moving on to the next case. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. In late March 2024, the normally quiet town of Hut-Eaton, Kansas was shaken by the mysterious disappearance of 2 mothers, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. What began as an ordinary trip took a sinister turn when their car was found abandoned on a remote road, leaving behind more questions than answers. With minimal evidence but growing suspicions, law enforcement launched an investigation that crossed state lines. As the case shifted towards suspected foul play, arrests were made, one of which involved an individual closely connected to the personal life of one of the missing women. Veronica Butler, born in 1996 in Oklahoma, grew up primarily in Guyman. She graduated from Yarborough High School in February 2015, a location eerily close to where her abandoned vehicle would later be found. A Marine, she was deeply devoted to her two young children from a previous relationship. Julian Kelly, 39, originally from Gering, Nebraska, had settled in Hugoton, Kansas with her husband, Heath Kelly, a local minister. Heath Kelly had been appointed as the new minister at Willow Christian Church in Indianola, Nebraska in November 2023, though he had not yet started his position. Jillian, serving as the secretary of the Hugoton First Christian Church, was deeply involved in her faith and the religious community. As a mother of four, she balanced her professional duties with a bustling home life. Known for her warmth and active participation in church activities, Jillian was recognized as a reliable pillar of support. She mentored her peers and was always willing to lend a hand or a listening ear to those in need. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were more acquaintances than close friends, though their lives intersected through their shared involvement in the First Christian Church in Hugoton. While they weren't extremely close, Jillian had been appointed as one of the court-ordered supervisors for the visitations between Veronica and her children. At the time, Veronica's children were residing with a grandparent in Eva, Oklahoma. On March 30, 2024, Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly embarked on what was intended to be a routine trip from Yucatan, Kansas to Eva, Oklahoma. The purpose of the journey was for Veronica to pick up her two children, with plans to celebrate her daughter's 6th birthday. Veronica's son, who was 8 years old, was also part of the trip. This 45-minute drive was one Veronica, as a dedicated mother, frequently made. It was a day that began like any other, with both women preparing for the drive. They left early, planning to return the same day as they had done on numerous occasions. This time, unbeknownst to the two moms, the routine trip would take an unexpected and tragic turn. As night fell and neither woman made it to their destination or returned home, their family and friends began to worry. This led to a search that would soon escalate into a full investigation by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI. The last confirmed sighting of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly was when they left Yucatan. Their phone records showed that their devices were still active and transmitting signals until around 9:42 a.m. After that time, both phones ceased transmitting and were no longer detected by the networks. Later that same day, their car was discovered abandoned on a dirt path, about 1,000 feet off Oklahoma State Highway 95 and Road L, south of Elkhart, Kansas. This location was not far from Yarborough School, where Veronica had graduated. The school was closed on Monday, April 1st, out of an abundance of caution, and reopened but remained on lockdown Tuesday, given the unknown nature of the missing persons incident. The school's superintendent said Butler was part of the class of 2015 and was a class of one that year, meaning she was the only senior graduating. The superintendent wrote, "I joked about her being the top of her class and, well, the bottom also. Location was remote, an open area that rarely saw much activity. The abandoned car stood out to passerby. Inside the vehicle, the scene was disturbing. A small amount of blood was found, suggesting that violence had taken place. Outside the car, separate pools of blood were also discovered, indicating that whatever transpired occurred both inside and outside the vehicle. The doors of the car were left open, implying that the occupants may have been forced out abruptly or had fled in haste. Veronica's glasses were also found in the roadway near a broken hammer. A pistol magazine was found inside Jillian's purse at the scene. No pistol was found. The area surrounding the car was vast and open and offered no immediate clues or witnesses. This isolation only heightened concerns about what might have happened to Veronica and Jillian. From the very beginning, authorities deemed the disappearance suspicious and ramped up their efforts. Search teams scoured fields and forests, while investigators canvassed the surrounding area in search of any clues that could illuminate the women's final known movements. As days passed without any sign of Veronica or Jillian, the communities where they were deeply embedded came together. Prayer services organized by both Willow Christian Church and the Huguenot Assembly of God united residents in hope and solidarity. Social media pages and community bulletin boards filled with appeals for any information related to the case. The Willow Christian Church posted on Facebook, "Please pray that Jillian and her friend Veronica are safe and that they are found quickly. God, please bring these women home to their families who are so worried about them." Behind the scenes, law enforcement worked tirelessly, piecing together the women's last known activities. They checked into the personal and professional relationships and followed up on all tips received. The absence of solid evidence or a clear lead in the investigation only intensified the frustration and fear felt by everyone involved. Travis Woodworth, a close friend, expressed the emotional toll, saying, "Not knowing anything, not knowing if they're still here in Kansas, in Oklahoma, or where they are. My heart just dropped. It's been a heartbreaking week with many sleepless nights." Dreely Houts, another friend of the missing women, shared the shock, adding, "Nothing like this really happens around here." So, one, it was a shock. It was her of all people. Kelly also said that Veronica lights up a room and always shared a smile, and that everyone must pray for her family and fiancé, Tracy. The OSBI spokesperson, Hunter McKee, reiterated the disturbing nature of the disappearance. He mentioned the rural location of the car and the complete lack of contact with the women as primary factors fueling their concerns about foul play. He added, "And usually you can use cameras and footage to see maybe what had occurred or what had led up to that." On April 13, 2024, the investigation led to the arrest of 4 people in connection to Veronica and Jillian's disappearance and demise. 54-year-old Tad Burt Cullum, 50-year-old Tiffany Michelle Adams, 44-year-old Caldwell Twombly, and 43-year-old Cora Twombly. Eventually, a 5th suspect by the name of Paul Grice was also arrested. Although they had yet to find their bodies, the evidence collected from the scene was instrumental in establishing foul play and aiding in the quick arrests of the suspects involved. Hunter McKee said that the evidence that was discovered inside of that abandoned vehicle and around it were able to help our investigators determine that there was foul play involved. What was in the vehicle and around it we cannot discuss. The loved ones had to be held back from attacking the suspects as they entered the courtroom, the first time they had been seen in public since their arrest. The 4 individuals were charged with 2 counts of slaying, 2 counts of kidnapping, and conspiracy in the end of Veronica and Jillian. They were booked into the Texas County Jail. The day after the arrests on April 14th in a secluded area of Texas County, Oklahoma, the search for the 2 missing mothers ended with a grim discovery. Authorities including the OSBI, the FBI, and the Texas County Sheriff's Department announced that they had located 2 bodies. The remains were then transported to the office of the Oklahoma Chief Medical Examiner to undergo investigation and autopsies. Officials said that all children involved are safe. It is unclear where the children were at the time of the slayings. The investigation into the disappearance of Veronica and Jillian led authorities to a rural property less than 10 miles from where the women were last seen. This location became a focal point after investigators uncovered evidence linking the suspects to the area. According to court documents, 2 burner phones associated with the 4 suspects had pinged near a recently disturbed plot of land on the property. A hole had apparently been dug, then refilled, and discreetly covered with hay. The property owner, Jamie Beasley, provided chilling details to the investigators. He talked about his interactions with Tad Burt Cullum, one of the arrested suspects. Cullum had allegedly requested to use a skid steer to perform what he harmlessly described as dirt work to bury concrete. Just 2 days before Veronica and Jillian vanished, Cullum had approached property owner Jamie Beasley. He asked about using the heavy machinery to remove a stump and participate in other digging activities. Following the women's disappearance, Cullum, feeling the pressure of the investigation, warned Jamie that law enforcement considered him a person of interest. He noted that the skid steer tracks might look suspicious. Jamie was advised by Cullum to simply assert that the suspect had been carrying out general land maintenance if questioned. As the investigation continued and officials began piecing together not only the how and who behind the crime, but also the way, they uncovered a detail that would shock the entire community. One of the suspects had a surprisingly close connection to Veronica Butler. Tiffany Adams was Veronica's mother-in-law, making her a relative by marriage and the grandmother to Veronica's children, the grandmother with whom the children stayed in Eva. During the investigation, Adams told the OSBI that on March 29th, her son and her grandchildren spent the night elsewhere. She had planned to pick them up the following morning prior to meeting up with Veronica. Court documents show that Adams contacted Veronica at 9 a.m. on March 30th to confirm their appointment. According to Adams, Veronica told her she was not going to make it because something came up. Phone records confirm that the conversation happened, but that Veronica was actually on her way to pick up Jillian at the time. Wrangler Rickman, the father of Veronica's 2 children, had legal custody but was in a rehabilitation facility at the time. This meant that the children were living with Adams at the time of the disappearance. The potential motive in the case seemed to be tied to the ongoing custody battle over Veronica's children that began in February 2019. The contentious legal battle consisted of frequent court appearances and crucial hearings, hinting at the high stakes for all parties involved. 10 days before Veronica went missing, she filed for more visitation and was seeking full custody. There was an upcoming court hearing on April 17th that was poised to potentially grant Veronica an unsupervised visitation rights. OSBI interviewed the person who usually supervises the visits, and she said she was available to supervise that day. But Adams told her to take a couple weeks off from visitation. Adams wanted to question her grandchildren about how Veronica's approved visitation supervisors were. Tiffany Adams sometimes resisted handing over the children to her own son, despite his legal custody rights. The fact that law enforcement has also been called to intervene in the custody issues was a clear indication that there was a volatile family dynamic. Recordings also indicated that Adams and her boyfriend, Tad Cullum, who was also one of the 4 suspects arrested, had made threats against Wrangler. Wrangler's grandmother reported in February 2024, he told her they did not have to worry about the custody battle much longer because Adams had it under control. Adams knew the path the judge walked to work, and we will take out Veronica at drop-off. Wrangler was confirmed to be in a rehabilitation facility in Oklahoma City at the time of the disappearance. After obtaining a search warrant for Adams' phone on April 1st, OSBI agents discovered searches related to tasers, gun shops, prepaid phones, and methods to lure someone from their home. A search of local gun shops showed Adams had purchased 5 stun guns on March 23rd and 3 prepaid cell phones from Walmart. The cell phones were traced to areas significant to the investigation, including where Veronica's car was found and their last known location. On March 30th, between 10:16 and 10:35 a.m., 2 of these phones were tracked to a remote pasture where evidence of recent soil disturbance was apparent. A buried hole covered with hay was found roughly 8.5 miles from Veronica and Jillian's last known spot within a time frame consistent with the disappearance of the 2 mothers. All the suspects belonged to an anti-government group called God's Misfits that regularly met at the Twombly's home. On March 30th, their 16-year-old daughter noticed that Cora and Cole Twombly were not home, but returned around noon. They had allegedly taken a blue and gray Chevrolet pickup truck. After returning, they asked their teenage daughter to clean the pickup's interior. She also told investigators that her mother admitted that she and her father had blocked the road to intercept Veronica and Jillian. They then directed them towards where Adams, Cullum, and Grice were waiting. When questioned about why Jillian had to be slain as well, Ora justified it by saying Jillian was not innocent because she supported Veronica. When asked if the bodies were hidden in a well, Cora's cryptic reply was something like that. Their daughter also talked about earlier attempts to take Veronica Butler's life around Hugoton in February 2024. These attempts included a strategy to lure Veronica Butler outside, a tactic mirrored by the web search found on Adams' phone. Ora also described a plan to simulate an accident by dropping an end-hal through Butler's windshield. Such incidents commonly occurred when driving past work vehicles. Prosecutors say there had been many attempts to take Veronica's life. Other court documents show the years of turmoil between Veronica and Adams. Efforts to secure a protection order did not get a judge's approval. Case then spoke with Clinton Butler, Veronica's father. When asked if he felt the justice system failed his daughter, he responded 100%. A celebration of life service was held for Jillian on April 28th and for Veronica on May 3rd. Rice, 31, made his first court appearance in Texas County, Oklahoma on May 1, 2024. It is unclear why the police did not arrest Grice when the others were arrested. His arrest came 9 days later. He admitted that he was a part of the planning, slaying, and burial of Veronica and Jillian. During the hearing, he was denied bail. According to the motion, there were 3 reasons involved in the decision. Proof of guilt is evident, violent offenses are believed to have happened, and he is facing a maximum sentence of life or life without parole. He will get a public defender since he said he cannot afford to hire his own. According to Adams' affidavit, she also did provide a recorded statement to law enforcement indicating her responsibility for the slaying of the deceased. Veronica and Jillian were more than victims in a sensational case. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and loved ones. This case serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that crime has on victims and their families, going far beyond the headlines and courtrooms. For the public and the loved ones of the victims, the wait for the trial and its outcome can be an agonizing period filled with uncertainty. As the legal process unfolds, they must grapple with the slow pace of judicial proceedings. It can often feel frustratingly sluggish compared to the immediate impact and emotional upheaval caused by the crime. The hope for all is that justice for Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly will be served. There is an effort in Kansas to make sure the names of Veronica and Jillian are not forgotten. Hamlin and Beth Beard, co-owners of Main Revelation, a small business in Yucatan, have launched a T-shirt campaign to support the families of Veronica and Jillian. The T-shirts feature Jillian's favorite Bible verse on the back, and all proceeds will go directly to the victims' families. Rice is expected to return to court on May 15th, alongside the other 4 individuals who have been arrested and charged in connection with the case. Moving on to the next case. Petra Zitka. Petra Zitka was a 24-year-old computer science student at Braunschweig University in Germany. On July 26, 1984, she visited her dentist and then stopped by a store to purchase a printer cartridge as a birthday gift for her younger brother, Karsten. She also asked her neighbor, Misha, to water her plants while she was away. Petra had plans to visit her parents in Wolfsburg for the holidays. She told her parents how excited she was to spend time with them, complete her school assignments, and care for her younger brother. Petra's family eagerly anticipated her return home, but sadly, she never arrived. Initially, they assumed she had stayed longer at the university, but there was no trace of her there. 2 days later, when she failed to attend Karsten's birthday party, her parents reported her missing. A large-scale police search was launched, and her case was even featured on television, but no leads surfaced. There was not much to go on for the police, and the case went cold. In 1985, a 19-year-old carpenter's apprentice, simply known as Gunter K., confessed to ending the lives of both Petra and a 14-year-old. The police did not believe his story, however, and found that he had nothing to do with Petra's disappearance. In February, 31 years after Petra disappeared, there was finally a breakthrough in the case. The police were called to an apartment in Dusseldorf belonging to a 55-year-old woman by the name of Petra Schneider. She wanted to report a burglary. The police wanted to see her ID, and only then did she tell them the truth. She then admitted that she is the girl that went missing 31 years ago. She said that she carefully planned her disappearance. Even after being found, she wants no contact with her family. Since her disappearance, she had been living in various places across Germany under the name Petra Schneider. She had no passport, Schneider. She had no passport, identity card, bank account, doctor, dentist, or insurance. Petra saved up 4,000 Deutsche Marks, equivalent to $2,000 to fund her disappearance. She avoided everyone and kept to herself mostly. If it wasn't for the burglary at her apartment, the case may never have been solved. Her family is devastated. Her father passed away a few years ago, but her brother and mother were in shock and in tears when they heard the news. The police tried to arrange a reunion between Petra and her family, but she is adamant about never wanting to see them again. Let me know in the comments section if you think Petra should have told her family she was safe after leaving. Moving on to the next case.